Dynamite Entertainment's Terminator No. 6 by Declan Shalvey and Lorenzo Ray is set to bring the attention to the T-600 model, one of the first ever Terminator models. This early Terminator was also the first unit Skynet had on hand for its first time travel infiltration missions against John Connor. It's big, crude, and terrifying when its rubbery skin sloughs off to reveal a pretty grimdark endoskeleton. In the comic, readers see how the T-600's unsettling, uncanny valley vibe is both a weakness and a brutal advantage. It can't pass for humans close up, but that half-melted, glowing-eyed monster is enough to make the best of rebels wet their pants. While the comic will throw more light on the model and we wait for it, I thought this would be a good time to just explore the T-600 model from the two timelines we already have. Let's begin. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Original Timelines T-600. The T-600, also called the T-600 model or the 600 series, appeared in 2011 as one of Skynet's earliest mass-produced infiltrators. These were basically the foot soldiers of Skynet, the earliest kind. Some resistance fighters nicknamed these units rubbers because of their synthetic latex covering. From a distance or in low light, a T-600 could pass for a human silhouette, but in daylight or up close, the rubbery skin gave it away. This model was an important step for Skynet because it marked a shift from building purely non-humanoid hunter-killers to making humanoid battle units that could blend into human populations, at least under the right conditions. Although their appearance was good enough to fool a few people in the dark, the T-600 still had clear limitations. Its endoskeleton was made of titanium alloy, which gave it impressive resistance to damage, but made it vulnerable to heat. In later models, Skynet used coltan alloy instead, since coltan had a higher melting point and reduced the risk of the machine overheating. Even with the titanium alloy, the T-600 was a powerhouse in terms of strength and agility. Standing around 6 feet tall and weighing nearly 800 pounds, it could lift objects 5 times heavier than itself. It had enough force to punch through concrete or metal without damaging its servos. It normally ran at about 600 kilometers per hour or 37 miles per hour, and could reach short bursts of up to 75 kilometers per hour or 46 miles per hour. Although those higher speeds put extra stress on its joints. Skynet's production of T-600 units stemmed from the original designs and test models once built by Cyberdyne Systems Corporation. The T-600 was a direct evolution from earlier non-humanoid machines. This model was considered more human-sized, which made it an effective infiltrator on the battlefield. Though it wore synthetic latex over its titanium exoskeleton, that covering was far from perfect. Many resistance fighters quickly realized that the rubber skin looked off. However, under dim lighting, some soldiers mistook these machines for real people, which was enough for Skynet's early infiltration efforts. One reason the T-600 became important was its role in bridging the gap between older bulky designs and the more refined infiltrators like the T-800. The T-600's rubber skin and near-human facial structure laid the groundwork for future models that used living tissue instead of latex. This focus on resembling humans more closely came from Skynet's desire to walk undetected among human survivors. In fact, the T-600's clumsy latex design led Skynet to develop the T-700, which then evolved into the T-800, a model covered in actual flesh. That flesh covering made infiltration far more effective. In the Resistance timeline, the T-600 had become obsolete by 2029. Production had stopped, and the machines that remained were prone to malfunctions. By that time, they were no longer connected to Skynet's network, so they couldn't transmit intel on Resistance troop movements or request reinforcements. In that timeline, any T-600 with rubber skin was sometimes classified as a T-650, though the functional difference was not dramatic. The main point was that the entire 600 series had fallen behind Skynet's more advanced designs. Design-wise, the T-600 can be seen as a streamlined and lighter version of the T-500. It featured a more sophisticated CPU and a head structure that allowed a hinged jaw and more human-like facial proportions. That design choice was part of Skynet's plan to create a Terminator that could one day wear real biological tissue without any odd lumps or folds. This design approach carried over to the T-700 and the T-800, whose endoskeletons were so close to a human skeletal frame that the tissue above them looked natural. Early T-600s never fully convinced people at close range, because latex lacks the texture, warmth, and subtle details of real flesh. Yet Skynet's logic in those days was more concerned with mass production and basic infiltration tactics, so the T-600 served as a crucial testing ground for new infiltration concepts. The history of the T-600 differs slightly across various timelines. In the original timeline, Skynet became self-aware and initiated Judgment Day in 1996, which set the stage for its Terminator production schedule. But in alternate timelines, such as those seen in Rise of the Machines, Salvation, and the Sarah Connor Chronicles, Judgment Day was postponed. Sometimes it happened in 2003, 2004, or even 2011. Because of these shifts, the T-600's development also happened later. Despite the compressed timeline in those alternate scenarios, Skynet still managed to roll out the T-600, though the exact dates varied. In the Rise of the Machines timeline, the United States military and cyber research systems had already started building a prototype T-600, and they were also working on a T-800. This indicates how advanced government and military research was by the early 2000s in that storyline. In the Redemption timeline, there's evidence that some T-600 prototypes were completed by 2003. These differences all stem from the fluid nature of time travel in the Terminator universe. Whenever someone alters the past, a ripple effect changes Skynet's development schedule, which means its Terminator models might appear earlier or later than they did in the original timeline. In some accounts, a prototype axial endoskeleton for the T-600 was even depicted in a deleted scene from Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines. While that scene didn't make it into the final cut, it hinted at Skynet's constant experimentation with different materials and structural designs. The T-600's place in the larger Terminator family tree remains significant, because it was a step up from purely mechanical and inhuman killing machines. It also laid the groundwork for more realistic infiltration units, which caused the Resistance far greater trouble later on. Although the T-600 was not as refined as later models, its introduction changed the battlefield. Resistance troops realized they could no longer just look for large, looming hunter-killers. They now had to worry about humanoid figures that, under the worst conditions, could blend into a crowd or lurk in the shadows. The machine's weight and limited range of facial expression gave it away in most daylight encounters, but at night, that rubber skin could appear human enough to lead soldiers into deadly traps. Salvation timeline. So as I was saying earlier, the different timelines have different versions of the T-600 model, but the model itself remained a bit obscure in the original timeline, only gaining some screen time in the Salvation timeline. So let's explore the T-600 from this timeline. People in the Resistance sometimes called it a skin job, because that rubber covering is meant to hide its mechanical body. This unit was mass-produced starting in 2016, which makes it an early example of Skynet's approach to infiltration. We also learned that these T-600s operate in 3 distinct modes: direct, automatic, or autonomous. Under direct control, Skynet commands it like a soldier in a simulated war. In automatic mode, it reacts to a wide set of pre-programmed triggers. In autonomous mode, it roams on its own for extended periods and scours ruined areas on search and destroy missions. Its standard weapon is an M134 minigun. Unlike some Terminator models, the T-600 doesn't always have its gun hardwired into its arm. Certain versions, like the Los Angeles T-600, carry a grenade launcher on the left arm. Others use an F-2000 instead. Though not the most precise weapon, the minigun's firepower compensates for its lack of accuracy, as shown when a T-600 chases Marcus and Kyle. A T-600 may even pretend to be inactive to lure survivors, then strike without warning. It also shoots off its own limbs if struck, proof of its commitment to Skynet's directives. Its electromagnetic core helps it reattach limbs by impulses that guide them back to the main body. Despite its raw power, the T-600 from the Salvation timeline is heavy and not very fast. John Connor notes that it's a crude design. Its shoulder joints and back remain vulnerable to gunfire, and a well-placed knife to the targeting system in the neck can disrupt its movement. This Terminator's large frame also makes it easy to spot, especially since its mechanical parts are barely concealed. That rubber skin is less durable than the living tissue on newer models and peels away to expose metal that rusts over time. Skynet eventually replaced the T-600 with the sleeker and more advanced T-800, which has a hyperalloy combat chassis and realistic flesh covering. However, T-600s still appear on the battlefield. It provides heavy fire support when T-800 units take the lead. They remain a threat, especially for anyone who mistakes their hulking silhouette for a human outline in the dim light. Marvelous verdict. Even with its shortcomings, the T-600's influence on Skynet's entire Terminator program is undeniable. It represents the first big step toward a more deceptive war machine, one that could hunt its targets under a veil of disguise. This path continues through the T-700 and culminated in the T-800, a model that finally used living tissue to appear almost indistinguishable from a real human. The T-600 might seem crude in comparison, but it was Skynet's first bold attempt to walk among its prey, rather than chase them as a towering metal skeleton. And in the world after Judgment Day, that small edge often meant the difference between life and death for unsuspecting survivors. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.